Hi, my name is Daniel McLaughlin. I'll put that through there. I'm an implementation engineer with Jamf. I'm based out of Sydney. That's why I sound funny and why I seem a bit tired. Before I was an implementation engineer, I was also a professional service engineer with Jamf, covering APAC region and a little bit further. So got a lot of exposure to different customers in regions where cloud wasn't an option, or financial and security organization. Also a lot of education that had proxies. So they thought this would be good for me to do. So the session's called MDM not working, was it the proxy? It's always the proxy. Now, I probably should start by saying it isn't necessarily always the proxy, but it usually is. But there are some times I've seen where I've been arguing with the network admin, and it turns out it wasn't the proxy, it was DNS. Yeah, there's some nods there. So what we're going to sort of have a look at here is what do we mean when we say proxy? Because there's sometimes a little bit of misconception around that. So we'll go like a little bit of deeper dive into the sort of definition of it, and then what people actually mean by it. The different types of configurations that we'll get on a servers and clients, and the impact that it has on the MDM on the device. I'll touch briefly on APNS traffic, but Brad Chapman, who is somewhere in the room, I'm assuming, is his talk 2 years ago on APNS of Push Odyssey goes in that in so much better detail than I could. And even his talk a couple of days ago as well, if you didn't catch it, it will be up on that when we have the recordings posted up. Recommend you go and check that out to get a better understanding of the APNS there. I'll also sort of cover some of the security settings that Apple are enforcing, so that will potentially conflict with your proxies and your device communication. And we'll do some sort of little bit of troubleshooting aspects, how to look for things, and if there's time, some questions, and maybe some answers. You never know. So, what's a proxy? Webster's Dictionary defines. No. This is actually from Webster's Dictionary, though. And you can see, you can read that text there much faster than I could read it out. But there's nothing there about technology. It's you're nominating an agent, power of attorney, something like that. There's nothing about a certain computer name isn't even up there. And if you Google proxy these days, chances are you'll find something about how to spoof your location for legal reasons, I'm sure. So let's sort of try and translate it into technical sense. So we've got a sort of scenario here. We can see a use case for a proxy server. Now you got Alice unable to contact Bob. So Alice instead makes a request to the proxy server. Then the proxy server will make that request on behalf of Alice. So if we remember the definition, it's sort of someone, power of attorney, someone acting on behalf of. We'll even see actually that connection stops. The arrow doesn't flow through, it's actually stopped, and then the proxy server is going to take that request and then forward it on to Bob. Now, from a security point of view, and Bob's point of view, he doesn't know who Alice is. He doesn't see Alice. He sees the proxy server. So that's the security benefit there. You're obscuring the client making the request. An additional benefit of this is, let's say you had a third person like John also wanting to ask Bob for the time. If you had some certain settings in your proxy server to cache or cache that setting, maybe it's only one external connection out from the proxy server, and it's actually reading that information. Now, probably not ideal in this scenario because it's time, but if you had a large package and you're in a very low bandwidth location, that can help minimize how many external network traffics you need to do. So when we see this as a proxy, that's probably not what most organizations think. This seems actually useful. This is beneficial. Why is the proxy? Why is it breaking? It's because most organizations that I'm talking to, they mean a web filter. They want to lock this down. They want to stop things going out. And so that's just a proxy is all web filters might be proxies. Not all proxies are web filters. It's probably the best way I could say that. So, laser pointer is the wrong button. Oops. So let's have a look at some of the options we have for setting proxy onto macOS and Apple devices. So we've got what's called the manual option, where we're ticking the boxes and we're sending it to the port and the IP or the DNS, FQDN, and we've got auth if we need to. And we've got a little bypass window down there. We can say, OK, specific URLs, don't send those requests to this destination. Instead, try and go direct. And now, this is probably the oldest and most painful way of setting proxy settings on a device. Got some nods there in the room. So then there was an evolution of that, and then we've got an automatic proxy discovery, or automatic proxy configuration, I should say. This method uses the URL instead. Now, older versions of the operating system, you could have put a local file. And it's just a JavaScript file with a list of IPs and hosts to ignore and other things to go through direct. But you can see now it has to be HTTP or HTTPS. The local file method does not work anymore. But it's not really that secure from, at least my point of view, because you still have to define something on the client. And the client can see this URL. Like, the user can see this. They can copy and paste that into a web browser. We'll download the file, and they can have a look at it. So from a security point of view, and most organizations who are using proxies are security-minded, that's not ideal. So the third method that I'll mention here is this, just auto proxy discovery. Now notice there's no window. There's no URL mentioned. There's no destination, DNS, IP. It's just a tick box. Even the bypass window is empty. And this is the method that I would say is probably like best practice method, the most preferred method for Apple devices especially. Because what it's doing, it's getting that same pack URL, but it's being issued out over the network. So via DHCP option 252, I believe. Or there's a DNS method as well called the wpad.dat method. You can Google those in your own time. And the benefit of this is you could have this ticked on. If they're at home, obviously those settings aren't going to be pushed out over their own home network. But if they come in, they're going to receive those details. You can update those on your central server. Make some changes. If you're doing on the DHCP method, you might have different DHCP scopes with different config files. Now we've got this fourth option. Now there's nothing ticked there, so we're like, well, no, you haven't turned anything on. But there is a type of proxy that I'm going to talk about, which is called transparent proxy. And now this is where there is nothing defined on the device. There is nothing explicitly set on the device about a proxy. But there is a proxy in your environment that is going to, maybe it's based on the router IP. So every piece of packet of data is going to be going and hitting this transparent proxy. Now, that might seem like an ideal method because, well, I don't need to turn anything on the devices. The device, if it doesn't know that there's a proxy that's going to be sending data to, you might find that there's some false positives in your experience. And so the troubleshooting will be quite different on that. Alrighty. So I'll show you the same sort of stuff on iOS and iPadOS. You can see we almost have like the exact same options. I say almost. You'll notice there's something missing on iOS for the manual method. There's no bypass window. It's going to try and send everything. So if you've got internal directories and websites, it's going to try and send everything out, then go back in. Also, again, can't really script this, so you've got to be doing some profiles. Not ideal. So we can do automatic. Still set the pack URL. Or with iOS, we can set automatic and leave the URL blank and hit save, and it will actually use that auto proxy discovery method that I mentioned on the macOS. Option 252 in DHCP or wpad.dat DNS. Oh, jet lag, you're a wonderful thing. Now with Apple TVs, tvOS, there's no menu option. You can't do anything with this manually explicitly set on the device. The only way that you can set proxies for tvOS devices, oh, there we go, pointed the right way, is with a config profile, either by Apple Configurator or MDM. So some things to be aware there when you're trying to set these things on the Apple devices. For those who are curious, that's a pack file. It is a JavaScript file. Some people can see a little bit of bash type into it. It's basically like a big if-else statement. So you can see if there's like hosts matching based on like a DNS address. You can do wildcards in front of it. You can say different IP ranges and pipe them all together and group them together. And you say, OK, if you match this, go direct. Else, just return to the proxy. So whether you're using the automatic pack file or the auto discovery, the automatic proxy configuration or discovery, it would be a pack file like this or a wpad file like this that would be somewhere on the network. So you've just had me just rant about, like, well, hang on, proxies are clearly available in Apple. They're there as menu items. We don't have to do any weird hacky stuff to set these settings. Why are we saying it's always the proxy? And this is a meme that one of my colleagues has made. And it's come up in our chats more than once when we'll have like people who are out on site, are having problems, stuff like that. And one will ask, like, do they have a proxy? And they say yes. And then this meme pops up. And it's generally because a proxy server or web filter is designed to get in the way. It's designed to intercept. And what's common to turn on with this interception is SSL Inspection. And so this is where it's going to hijack that traffic. And it's going to, if it's encrypted, because it's HTTPS, it's going to rip it apart, have a look at it, seal it up. But it can't seal it up with the original certificate. It doesn't have that. So it will reseal it up with its own certificate and then send it on. But the destination is not going to know where that first certificate came from or the second certificate came from, so it's going to reject it. And so this is generally what we'll see is happening. That is not supported. SSL inspection for Apple traffic, especially, not supported. Don't do it. So different proxy servers will have a different kind of look on this. This is a proxy server that I have set there. You can see it's we've got HTTPS SSL inspection turned on. You can see at the top this is called SSL man-in-the-middle filtering, which I thought was very political. It's a man-in-the-middle attack. It's getting in that way, and from the traffic's point of view, it's 100% an attack. But they'll turn on that. You can see down at the bottom there, it's got a CA, because it's got to have to generate a certificate to do this. And this is something that's just going to break anytime you've got traffic going to Apple. So now it's common whenever I'm speaking with customers, especially security-minded, Windows-orientated ones, and they're like, I'm talking, it's like, you've got to go direct. You can't go through the proxy. You can't inspect it. Windows doesn't require this. Sorry. Yeah. No, that's Google. Whoops. Yeah, so Microsoft and Google don't require that. It's Apple being really weird, requiring a direct and unproxied connection. How dare they? Yeah, FCM is Google Cloud's new messaging system, Firebase cloud system. They both say the same thing. That kind of APNS traffic especially is going to go, and I'll put some of those links back up at the end if you want to validate that. So yeah, Apple are not being the only ones who are saying for their sort of traffic needs to go direct or unproxied. Some things they say, like, it can go through a proxy, it just can't be touched, it can't be looked at. Don't inspect it. So now, I talk to network admins a lot, and they'll say it's not blocked. And I have this face. But the thing is, from their point of view, it might not actually be blocked. It was just intercepted. Right? So it's very key to understand the difference between those two things. And we'll have a look at a couple of scenarios there to sort of see what I mean. So if we have some very simple traffic that's not proxy aware, so in this case we'll use the APNS client destination because the APNS daemon is not proxy aware. We've got some traffic, out 5223, happy. Proxy did not know it happened, wasn't proxy aware, nothing was sent, just hit to the firewall and gone. But if we have traffic that is proxy aware, in this case, let's say it's HTTP traffic, so something going over port 80 or unsecure internet traffic, it's going to hit the proxy. Proxy's going to, hijack it, intercept it, have a look at it, and then send it on. Now, in that scenario, it was HTTP traffic. That should always go to a proxy, and that should 100% be inspected. It should be looked at because it's not secure. It's not going to break that communication. But in this day and age, everything's basically going to be SSL. You've got organizations out there. You've got Let's Encrypt, who can make your SSL certificates for free. It's very hard these days to find a HTTP page. So if we have traffic that is proxy aware, that is secure, HTTPS traffic as an example. You can see it's signed there with a certificate. Proxy server grabs it, opens it up, has a look at it, it's ripped the certificate off, let's put a new red certificate on there, and sends it on to Apple. What's Apple going to do? Yeah. I like animations. Now, in that scenario, that's very much an oversimplification, especially like most traffic that's leaving an Apple device, it's not signed with a certificate. It's just going to a secure destination. All right, so let me sort of break that down a little bit better. So I've got a client that's typing in apple.com. It's a HTTPS site. The proxy server is going to pretend, it's going to stand up and say, I'm Spartacus. And it's going to say, yep, nope, I'm www.apple.com. Look, I've got a certificate that says so. But was like, well, yeah, but that's from somewhere that I don't know. So I'm not going to let it go any further. I didn't get a nice send and receive back, so the client itself isn't going to let it go any further. Firewall didn't have anything to do with it. Anything outside of Apple didn't actually do anything to do with it. It's actually local on the machine that's just like, no, not letting you do it. So how do we get successful communication out? And the thing that I mentioned before is it can go to the proxy, but don't touch it. Don't inspect it. Just let it flow through. Now, for some things that aren't proxy aware, that's where you'll have to do your firewall rules and whatnot as well. But for the majority of communication going out to Apple, you go into like iTunes, not anymore, or you go into the App Store or something like that. Those are all just HTTPS websites, web servers and destinations. They can still go through the proxy, and Apple's got a document out there using Apple technology in an enterprise environment, and it's got lists of things that are proxy aware. Just because they're proxy aware doesn't mean they are proxy supported. You've got to make sure you're not SSL inspecting those. Up in there. There we go. That's just a blow up of that little speech bubble of the certificate there. So you see SSL, it's been replaced by the internal CA, a nice and trusted CA authority. Some of you might have seen this, especially if you're on-prem Jamf Pro customers, where the first thing is there, it's generated its own self-signed certificate, and you can do like a proceed anyway. Has anyone had to do that? Is that familiar? You'll notice maybe on this, it might be a little bit hard to see, there's no proceed anyway on this. There are certain levels of security that Google, Microsoft, and Apple are all enforcing on a lot of their pages, which is called HTST, which stands for, HSTS, sorry, other way around. Which stands for HTTP Strict Transport Protocol. And it's designed to prevent man-in-the-middle SSL attacks. And you can see like right down the bottom, it's a little hard to see there. It will actually say the HSTS there. You cannot try and proceed further. There are certain websites and destinations just like, no, not going to happen. So now we've got devices in a browser state, and without a browser, how are we knowing if something's getting in the way? At least we could try this and we punch that into a web browser, we see the failback. But if we've got an iOS device that's going through automated enrollment, this is just a scenario that we don't want to see. There's a little cancel down the bottom there. I can't proceed any further. And if you've got devices out in the wild that are trying to do this, you're going to get a lot of really frustrated, unhappy users. That's going to, in turn, make you frustrated and unhappy. And not to mention, there are unknown device states. It doesn't approve anyone. It doesn't make anything easy. It's breaking MDM. So how do we look at sort of devices when they're going through a state where there is no sort of browser to help us sort of troubleshoot this? Now, when a device is set up assistant on a Mac OS, now I've got to stress right away, this is not something you tell your users. This is not something you make as like, hey, OK, turn your Mac on. This is not zero touch. But this is more used for troubleshooting. I think it was last year, there was a talk by Marcus Ransom here at JNUC called DEP Under the Hood, or Device Enrollment Under the Hood. He shows you this method as well, and specifically for troubleshooting only. But this is ways of sort of how you can get this out. But I've got a sort of short video here of when I'm running those key commands here, how I can actually turn on proxy through a GUI when I'm at the setup assistant. So I'll choose my country, and I've run the key code. And it's brought up terminal, but then I've got system preferences available through the Apple menu. You can go network, events, there's proxies. And I can tick OK and apply. I've now enabled proxies, proxy awareness on my macOS device. And then certain MDM enrollment could actually potentially go through. As long as I'm not SSL inspecting those destinations, but it's still going through. Again, you don't really want to tell people this. Those proxy settings, by the way, will actually persist all the way through the system setup assistant, right through to the desktop. You create your user, you log in, you open up system preferences under that user. That tick box is still ticked. Useful to know, not useful, it doesn't scale. For iOS and iPadOS, we can enable it at the setup assistant as well. Now, obviously, there's no key combo. But when you go through the setup assistant, and this video is going to play, country, well, English, language, English, country, Australia. Before you actually select a Wi-Fi network, you can press the home button, and you'll get Wi-Fi settings. This then makes a little blue eye next to all the networks. You tap on that eye, you got configure proxy. You can say automatic, next, and then join, and then you join the network. Now, I recommend the process of that is to do it in that order. Turn the proxy on before you try and connect to the network, because if you try and connect to the network first, it will immediately try and activate. And it won't be able to, because the proxy hasn't been turned on. It will time out, it will fail. You hit more Wi-Fi options, then you go through those steps. Not ideal still, because you still have to turn things on, but it is something that I've had to do for some organizations where they've got older firewalls that don't support URLs, and they're trying to whitelist on those. And making little videos like that can certainly help with onboarding, especially for iOS. There's no real danger in someone clicking a home button and turning something on, but it is something that some people may not have come across. And finally, also, if we've got, like, not finally, where non-interactive communications that are trying to check in, like a Jamf Pro binary trying to check in. And if you're doing that SSL inspection, we'll get something like this. But that's only where I'm running a command manually. If it's just running on itself on a recurring, it's just going to keep failing. So it might have enrolled at one point. So it's not just necessarily Apple traffic. If it's trying to go to your MDM server, and that's not specific to just Jamf Pro. It'll be for any MDM that I've seen, because they're all secured. If you're hijacking that SSL certificate, it's going to fail. So what do we need to do? How do we sort of stop this? We need to talk to the network team, unfortunately, but we talk to them, we have meetings, we sit down, we might bring Apple in, we bring Jamf in, we show them documents, we show them logs, and then, let's say, 3 months later, they've gone through and they said, yep, OK, we accept Apple's traffic is secure, and we'll turn off SSL inspection for those URLs. We're not going to do that. Massive win. But something's still not going through. What's going on? And so there's another aspect of proxies that I've come across, and it's called authentication. And this is where it's not enough to know that what's going through is hitting that proxy. We need to know who is making that request within our organization. Not just the device, but that person. Now, this is a configuration pane from my server. That authentication method, I could change to, say, Active Directory, LDAP, Radius, or local. But because I'm requiring authentication then, the request will go out. And if you've got something that supports single sign-on, maybe you've got a Kerberos ticket on your machine, maybe that will just pass through and it will seem seamless, and there was no authentication as far as the user is concerned. But for devices that don't have Kerberos tickets, or they don't support that single sign-on, you're going to end up with something like that. But that's not actually true. What you'll end up with is something more like this. And then this. And the reason why you're going to be getting sort of stuff like that is because there'll be so many things and services running in the back end that you're not aware of. Those like non-interactive communications. The device might be checking for a software update. The Jamf binary might be trying to check in. All of those things that are sort of happening, the user isn't aware, but they're getting this. It's a really bad experience for the users. So a lot of people are like, who've seen this. This is far too common, I'm sure. So some things we have to do is like, OK, can we sort of bypass the authentication request for these URLs as well? And that's where you got to do sort of like troubleshooting and logs and stuff like that. Or if it's like a one-to-one environment, is there a real use case for needing the auth? Like, can you match a device to a user in another way? Can you maybe scrape who the local user is and then have that fed through Jamf? Or maybe you got an asset manager that's got like, OK, that user's got that device. Maybe not for every organization, but it's something to maybe consider to stop that. Now, we've seen where it's like Apple devices trying to contact Apple via an MDM. What happens if they're like the MDM server? Like you've got Jamf Now or Jamf School or Jamf Cloud, not an issue for you guys. You're hosted. But if you're on-prem, the server is also going to want to try and talk to Apple. And there's other services potentially that you're going to actually need aware of. So we've got a Jamf Nation article. When it was first posted, which was a while ago, 5 years ago it was written. It's modified, not that long ago as well. It was pretty long. The only real changes that have occurred is maybe some cosmetic about Apple's names. It hasn't really expanded on what it communicates to. But it's still a very valid method, and I will put the links to all these sorts of there, and you can sort of photograph all those ones there and we'll back and forth and whatnot. But there's two methods listed in here on how to make your Jamf Pro web app proxy aware. Now, some things will not be proxy aware for APNS traffic, but for communication like that, the two methods are putting the proxy details directly into the database, and the other method is called a JVM method, a Java Virtual Machine method, where you put something in the database to say, look at the Java options. And I'll show you how that looks. So a manual method, if you've got the GUI of MySQL, most people don't, the command line there is on that KB article. It's very much like a manual method on iOS for setting those proxy. You've got your host and port and an optional username and password. There's no bypass. No, it's just going to be, hey, all right, we're going to try and send everything there. So this is where the JVM options are, in my opinion, the preferred method. And this is where you will have something, if you're using Windows as an example, you've got your Tomcat 8w.exe inside your Tomcat folder. If you're unsure, again, the KB article lists these paths. If you're using the Linux, it lists where these, it's a setenv.sh file, where you can put that in as well. Just to make that a little bit bigger for you there. All right, we've got our proxy port for HTTP, HTTPS, and we've got HTTP non-proxy hosts. And you can say, okay, just that pipe is to separate the different destinations that we're going to like our bypass window when we're setting it manually on macOS. But if you've got like a lot of hosts that you need to just ignore, there's another method you can do with it. And that's where you can use a system proxy equals true, and it will look at your operating system's proxy settings. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. Just if you've already got the pack file set or locally there, and it's part of the server's team, just do that flag and you're good. I'm quite lazy. I'd rather do something once. Okay, so how are we doing on time? We've seen how sort of proxies are getting in the way in the name of security. So we need to discuss, back with the networking team, we need to really bring up what that security is and who's got the better security. And a spoiler, it's Apple. They're focusing on security heavily, and they've got quite a few security features. I'm not going to go through them all, but a couple that you'll run into. When they're communicating through automated enrollment, you've got this thing called OCSP, which is the Online Certificate Status Protocol. It's a it's a HTTP protocol to look up certificate revocation status. So when it requests this, it will actually say, okay, this Apple CA, what's its status? But it's much more efficient than looking at the old school CRL lists. The certificate revocation list was a gigantic list. It would take forever to parse. There's an enhancement to OCSP, which is called OCSP stapling, where it makes a request, and it only needs to make the request once, and it will actually get like a token, a timestamp type thing. So it actually is like, okay, yep, all the other ones, all these other requests within that token time, I already know they're valid. I don't need to make a number of additional requests. Apple has an excellent KB article, so like getting started with Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager for MDM. And it lists 5 URLs that need to be whitelisted, 3 of which aren't even Apple's. They say digicert. One of them is actually ocsp.digicert.com. That's the purpose for there. It's to verify and validate that the CAs that we're hitting are valid. The other thing we have, and I'm not able to do this because I need to specifically talk about that one, is trust anchors, cert trust anchors. Or another term for it is constrained trust anchors. So this is where you'll have a root CA, an intermediate CA, and then the server certificate all on that sort of chain. With trust anchors, the client is not only just expecting that web certificate, but it could be expecting any and all of that chain. And if it doesn't respond with, like if one of those is missing, it's just going to reject the traffic entirely. Like when we replaced it in the man-in-the-middle attack. You remember that internal CA? That's part of Apple just rejecting it. Like, the response was a certificate, but the return of the trust was not something that we expected. So, I mentioned that we boiled down, we have two types of proxies. We have explicit and transparent. Now, explicit was then like our three sub-ones, auto-discovery or configuration URL or manual, but they are something that's explicitly being set on the device. With the transparent, nothing's been set. Now, again, you might prefer using the transparent method, and your network team might prefer transparent because they know every piece of traffic that's in their network is going to be going through their proxy. And it's one less thing for you as a device admin because you don't need to try and configure a tick box somewhere. But with encrypted SNI, or like SNI is server name indication, and there's an encrypted version of it which is available in TLS 1.3. And well, let's see, all right, what does that mean? And yeah, I had to write a lot of this for. In previous iterations of like TLS 1.2 requests, while you weren't inspecting the traffic, like the content of it, you could at least see the header of where it was going. And that was in the SNI header. So maybe you were, OK, not encrypting traffic, or not SSL inspecting any of that traffic, but you at least could see the destination. So then you could have proxy URLs to sort of say, well, hang on, that's an inappropriate content. That's flagged as a category that's not suitable for work or education. And maybe it's a gambling site, or who knows. But with encrypted SNI, that field is completely hashed out as well. So the proxy server in transparent mode has no idea where it's going. Now, this is great for when you're, say, maybe at an internet cafe, and you have people who potentially have a transparent server, transparent proxy on that internet cafe. They could see where you're going and get some scraping and that kind of thing. With encrypted SNI, they're not even going to know that. So transparent proxies aren't going to know that as well. So you're basically going to be set in a situation of like you either turn and block everything or you block nothing. Whereas if you explicitly set, then the device is aware that it needs to send a request to a proxy server. So that request will be also proxy aware. The proxy server will see where it's supposed to be going to, and it can then block it if it's required. So, inspecting the traffic is dead. Filtering the traffic isn't necessarily dead. Okay? But if you're trying to do transparent, now encrypted SNI is optional at this stage. It is something that Apple are doing on all of their servers. And the way cryptography is going, I could see it becoming a standard very soon. So it's all well and good to say it is the proxy, and it's always the proxy. But you've got to prove it's the proxy. They're not going to take your word on it, unfortunately. They're gonna need to see some evidence on this, and you never know, it could be DNS. So we got sort of like, we need some tools and stuff like that. So Wireshark is your friend, because I find network admins use Wireshark exclusively. The network team are your friends as well. You need to be working with this together. It's not you versus them. Like you make the case, if you actually say, well, actually, if we do this, the devices are going to be more secure at the end of the day. They're going to be more manageable rather than an unknown state. So we've got a few tools out there that we can use for sort of package captures and whatnot. Charles Proxy, if you haven't seen it, it's great for establishing a proxy locally on your machine so that you can then try and do your day-to-day operations, and it will give you a log of what's being blocked, and you can sort of try and rep that. Really good to help preempt before you do a large rollout. And you sort of say, well, hey, OK, I'm going to be hitting these URLs and whatnot. And then you can send those through to your admins. Wireshark as well, parsing. You've got local tools. You've got TCP dump. And then you can write that out there. iOS is a bit trickier. Apple Configurators console log. That will have a method where you can see traffic. You can also use what's called the RVICTL command. That's remote virtual interface control, is what I should say. And you can connect an iOS device to a Mac, and then you can run this. You do need Xcode installed in case you're trying to run this command now. and it will actually then list all of the available devices. You use the UDID of the device in lowercase. That's tricky. And then you can then turn it on as an interface that is available via TCP dump or Wireshark. So you can go through that. It's just connect to that. It's not using any internet sharing from the Mac. It's using all that. It's just firing that out through as a destination for you to then to send through. So let's have a look at what's look like. This is Charles Proxy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Push Diagnostics, because I'm finding APNS is not working. When Push Diagnostics opens for the first time, though, because it's an App Store app, it's going to phone into the App Store. And you can see in the background there, Charles Proxy is like, nope. There's requests, but failed. And if we didn't have Charles Proxy, all we'd have is the all too familiar spinning wheel, not going anywhere. Now, if we have a look in there, we can look at the one that's failed. We can see some more information about this. All right, we can see, OK, why was it not going anywhere? SSL proxying is turned on, so it's not going in through there. You can expand out and have a look on that side. Very nice and easy to read, I find. It's quite GUI friendly. It's not necessarily a macOS only tool. It is available for Windows as well. They give you a trial, and then you can sign up for it. It's very inexpensive. Now, if we look at Wireshark, however, it's a little overwhelming. There's a lot of things happening there. Wireshark will give you everything that's happening. Brad's talk 2 days ago, if you missed it there, he actually gives you like some examples of how to filter through that. I did not. So we're not going to do that. But here's where I'm going to open up iTunes, RIP. And we'll get a message here saying SSL certificate doesn't match. And I've stopped the thing now. It's still just going. There is so much data that just comes through in Wireshark, and you've got to scroll through and find some stuff. And connect, we see some connect requests. We can also see some ones where the destination port might be listed as 3128. That was my proxy port from earlier, so this is still explicit. And what you're actually looking for is a server hello or a certificate response there. And we can see there, that's not an Apple certificate. That's some friendly names in there. That's my name, my department. I made that CA. That's where my response is. So you can see sort of that kind of information when you don't have necessarily the browser, or it's trying to do like non-interactive communications. Like iTunes, I didn't know it was going to phone in. Well, I did, but when we keep going down there, now we can see all the retransmissions. It's going to keep trying and doing some things, but it's not going to get anywhere. So some things to sort of take away from this. Manual settings. You know, those two particular HTTP, HTTPS, the IP import, potential auth, and bypass. Don't use those. Just please. Especially on iOS, because you don't have that bypass option. Do use the explicit, especially the way Apple's going with TLS 1.3 and encryption and whatnot. It's going to be something that you've got to have to use. Yeah, some URLs, yeah, you've got to allow some unauth requests. There are going to be scenarios where the device, even if you did want authentication, if it's at the setup assistant, how are they going to authenticate? And yeah, broken record, but you can't inspect the SSL. It's just not going to happen. Not if you want to have a good time. So I promised there were some links. And there's 2 pages of said links, so if we need to go back and forth. But that's really where we're at, apart from questions. Otherwise than that, thank you very much for listening. Are there questions? We have questions.
I don't actually have a question. I wanted to say, first of all, great job. And you covered stuff that I wish that my session had enough time to include, like the details about the different types of proxy servers.
Sure.
And what works with different services and what won't. I actually had to build a launch daemon for the office that would turn the proxy settings on and off based on whether that computer was on the corporate network or outside.
Oh, really?
Because APNS does not work with proxy pack. It only
Correct.
works with the static proxies. But But then the other thing that you mentioned about SSL certificates and how they're based on the domain name or the host name, that's really critical to understand about encrypted communication, because network admins who have this mindset of let's whitelist the IP addresses, number one, that's dumb. Two, load balanced DNS services like Akamai will constantly rotate out their IP addresses. And so you cannot rely on an IP address as a whitelist factor anymore. You have to use the host name. Because the device is expecting to trust a host name, it doesn't give a crap about the IP address.
No.
It doesn't even know what the IP address is until it makes that DNS query. So it really starts with DNS, and it's always DNS. So yes, thank you SS Broski for that poem, by the way. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for touching on all of those things. Really excellent talk.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want me to go back a slide for the other links? Yes? Yeah, the bottom one there, using enterprise firewall for a Windows notification service. That was, I checked it this morning. It still says that. It was, they say they'll work on it. Something's coming soon, but.
Are you going to share the slides?
The slides will be shared. There is actually an enhancement of slides because I'm my own worst enemy, and there will be additional screenshots in those that actually give you a Wireshark dump of SNI and encrypted SNI, so you can tell there's difference. So the slides will actually have more information. Yes?
Hi, thanks. I might not have my information right, actually, but I
That's
think
okay,
I've
neither will
noticed.
I.
Yeah, I've noticed certain tools like curl, wget, and those things are not necessarily proxy aware, depending on how the proxy is configured.
Curl can be made proxy aware,
Okay.
But there's an extra flag that you need to do where you're sending something to it. What you would use if you're on a Mac OS doing that is NSCurl.
Okay.
That is proxy aware.
Oh, nice. Okay, I didn't know about that. Thanks.
Oh. Get those steps in. Again, I'll check, show of hands, slide A, slide B.
Hi, thank you. My question is, basically we've got, at our proxy, we've got Apple whitelisted.
Yep.
And it works beautifully most of the time, but what we've run into occasionally is an issue to where Apple uses CDN, and so then that traffic gets blocked. And I'm just kind of wondering if you've got any suggestions on what we might be able to do about that solution.
If you know what's being blocked and you know it's preventing it, that's where you sort of bring back up and you find what's the outcome if this thing is blocked, and you would still really try and get if you can get it unblocked. Is there a reason why it is blocked? Is it because it's just not Apple?
Yeah, basically, yeah, it's coming from AWS.
But it's Apple related.
Yes.
And they don't accept that as an argument.
No.
I'd probably try and work with, if you have like an Apple SE rep or an Apple contact, stuff like that, to bring them in, so that at least I've found that's been very helpful, where you have someone from the vendor saying, well, yeah, no, even though it doesn't have our name on it, here's the reasons why that's communicating there as well, to make that a holistic experience. Like the DigiCert URLs as an example, they're not Apple URLs at all for doing the OCSP check. But they're on an Apple document, so that's enough to say, well, they're there because of these reasons.
Thank you.
Hey, we use a proxy pack file in our environment only when, and it's only available to users when they're on CorpNet, basically, so either VPN or in Office.
Sure.
So
it's an internal URL that can only resolve. Yep.
So what we've seen is that a number of apps on like macOS as a platform behave weird when they're off CorpNet, but that's actually set. So it seems like, is there any caching of the pack file by macOS as a system?
Depends on the OS. There was occasions where it would do that. Other apps will just be aware that there's that pack file there, and it will try and use it to reach out.
But if access, they'll try to reach the URL to grab the pack file, or?
So the URL that you're defining on the pack file, the apps that you're talking about will actually try and use that pack file URL.
Okay. So even if it's not accessible, and that's what's
Even if it's not accessible, it's explicitly set on the device.
Okay.
So that's where that top method, that auto discovery method, is the preferred.
Yeah.
I also, I didn't really touch on this, but for organizations that do have pack files, it's good to maybe do an audit of those once in a while, because some people just add rules without checking if they could just expand an existing rule. The largest file I've seen is 34 meg. What? Yeah. Yeah, it's a text file, guys. There's no images in there. There was a lot of duplications in that. But to your point, though, because that is set explicitly on the device, those apps are going to be aware that it's there. They're going to try and connect.
Okay. Thank you.
We got, oh, wow. Did I allow enough time for questions?
Where were the hands being
My
raised?
first submission, they said, oh, we're worried you didn't leave enough time. I was like, man, I was going to add more information.
Hi there. So we recently went all in on SSL Inspection and authenticated proxy, which is,
I don't think I can help you.
it's painful. It is, I need to see a doctor. Anyway, so that proxy authentication required pop-up, extremely familiar to me. We are Kerberized, that takes care of most of it,
Sure.
but we still get those pops when the token or the ticket is expired or something.
Yep.
In unified logging or ASL or anywhere, is there something that I can see what's popping that?
Yes. Some things aren't necessarily going to use the Kerberos method. There are some system things that are going to
know.
ignore the user's ticket. There's no good answer for that. For some other organizations that aren't necessarily using that and they're 100% sure that their proxy server is Kerberized and they've got tickets and they're all valid and they're still getting those props, check to see if the proxy server is sitting behind a load balancer.
Yeah,
load
I'm
balancer-
more interested in
Oh, yeah, sorry.
not trying to run Wireshark throughout my entire business day.
Sure.
So that
That's a
I
lot of
can-
information.
Exactly. So does Apple provide any kind of back-end logging that when they pop that proxy authentication required dialog, that it's logged in a log somewhere that I can then search and destroy?
I don't know explicitly if there is, and it does depend on the request, because some things wouldn't be logged that are still just trying to phone in. Like, say, software update as an example, that will be logged in console, but it will say that it's just trying to check, and then you'll have to sort of marry up when that is. So the short answer is there's no good answer for it. If you can try and find like a nice hour of the day, maybe you've got the machine off the network for a long time, get Wireshark ready. If things haven't checked in a while, they're all going to queue. And then you connect to the Wi-Fi network with Wireshark on, and then maybe just take a dump of like 5 minutes. You might be able to sort of narrow that one down and then start sifting. Anyone else? Yes.
Just more of like a community note, because I dealt with this. If your security team has only opened up Apple's 17/8 block,
That's not enough.
It's not necessarily going to cover everything. For example, Internet Recovery uses oscdn.apple.com, but that redirects out to Akamai. And a lot of security teams, including my previous employer, said, no way in hell are we allowing all of Akamai unproxied.
Yeah.
So if you're having trouble with things like Internet Recovery, you're going to want to look beyond .apple.com and beyond Apple's Class A IP space.
Absolutely. And like when I'm talking to network teams, they're like, oh, we can only do it by IP. And I'm like, oh, no, I remember when I had to remember my friends' phone numbers because I didn't have an address book. I remember ICQ, but I thought we were in 2019 now. URLs are the way we have to go through. And if you've got an old firewall that only does IP, get a new one. You're going to have to. There are so many URLs that aren't going to have a static IP or part of a Class A. I'll mention the DigiCert again. That's a URL. That's not going to be a given as part of their semantic aren't going to give you an IP range. Like Jamf. If you're trying to talk to Jamf Cloud, we don't. We sit that behind load balancer that's controlled by Amazon. It might be that IP today. It might not be tomorrow. We can set external responding IPs, and those are static. But you got to whitelist by URL. And yeah, I've had that conversation with a network admin saying, do you still use ICQ? because there was no email on that. That was a number. One person said yes. Hi.
Yeah, so we've been doing SSL inspection for a while. We had it working fine from High Sierra through Mojave.
Yep.
And we went to Catalina with the new certificate requirements. We re-signed all those certs, made them SHA-2, but we're still hitting those
Not going to be enough.
Yes.
There's going to be the certificate pinning and all these other things like that. Even though it's supporting on that the encryption level of SHA-2, it's still not enough for Catalina. You can't inspect it. It's not the answer some people want to hear. It's the answer that's going to be. You know, I'm not going to go into it like I'm not a doctor. It's like, guess what's wrong? It's like, oh, you've got a broken foot, and they're going to look at me like, or you've got a broken foot. I'm not going to tell you a lie. Hi.
So I had a question kind of related to this. So one of the things that we have with our proxy, we use a .dat and everything. And a lot of tools that Apple has are proxy-aware, and they've told us even on that document they have that some of those may be proxy-aware, some of them may not be proxy-aware. We've had those conversations with them, which sort of surprised us a little bit. One of the things we have is a keychain. So proxy credentials are saved in the keychain locally on the device and everything, but we still get all those prompts that come up. You know, we get that proxy authentication popped up.
Yeah.
Tourist DE, all sorts of stuff like that. So, I mean, is there recommendations for that or anything?
Like I've had people who have had that, and generally it's the case, okay, maybe a password's reset, and I'm not assuming that's occurred. Nomad was great for that because it did update things on that. Half the time
we use Enterprise Connect to sync a lot of that stuff and everything.
Perfect.
Too, so.
Now, half the time actually what's something happening is the traffic actually wants to verify, is it you? And that's I don't agree with it, but that's where that sort of, because half the time you might say, okay, it wants to use your keychain, it wants to use the system preferences, and you'll click yeah, and it's saved, and then it goes through. But I don't work for Apple. I am a Jamf employee, but I can only speculate that it's down to Apple's sort of mentality. And there's someone at the back. Are you going to be able to expand on this? Fantastic.
If you use Enterprise Connect, there is in their download, there's some sample scripts, one of which was written by yours truly, that goes through your keychain and resets passwords after they change the password with Enterprise Connect.
Oh, no, they're using that already.
Oh, you're already
Yeah,
using it.
so the keychain item, just so I'm clarifying correctly, is the keychain item is the latest and up-to-date password. It is what should authenticate. You go to a website, it says, hey, I want to use authentication. It's like, yeah, but I already gave you authentication. It's saved. Then it says, okay, yeah, use system preferences. The other thing I found is like there's keychain items for different URLs.
Yes.
So that's something to be aware of. And you may not be updating those.
You might have to find the list of all the different proxies that are behind your load balancer. We have like 12.
There's
or
no
something
good
like
answer
that.
with a lot of these questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's ugly. And it kind of goes back to what somebody else was saying too on this. I'm trying to remember. Might want to jump back up.
Yeah. Have we got time for any more? I don't know. What time's the next session? Or is it lunch? No, there's one more. Put that there. We're okay?
It's at 11:30, so we should call it.
Okay, one more, because he's sitting right there. You don't have to run, and then we will wrap it up. I'll hang around. People can ask me questions as well.
So the main issue that I'm seeing is that I work for a network security company, so we do all this stuff.
Sure.
It makes our lives difficult. And at certain locations, main thing, we see APNS working for the most part almost everywhere, but we can't get, during Setup Assistant, for DEP to recognize the machine and initialize.
Yep.
And that's the same kind of prescription you're saying.
Yeah, so that's because APNS is only part of that equation. It has to talk to other locations and other URLs, has to talk to your MDM, has to talk to those 5 URLs that are mentioned on the KB article, and it'll try and talk to other URLs as well that you'll find on that. So it's not enough for just APNS.
Yeah,
for
because
automated
we're in
rollout.
the cloud, and then APNS is working, so I feel like, why is this not working?
Yeah, but no, that's the device trying to hit some of those other URLs. So you're going to do a little log search in there.
Great, thanks.
As I said, thank you very much for listening to me on a very riveting topic.